Greetings. Hi. A year ago, I came forth with a video about a very disturbing situation that I was being involved in Holland regarding my parental rights and my children. Um, First, I'd like to state a little bit about why I haven't come forward or gone more public until now. One, I was very traumatized and emotional, and it was very hard to process the situation. Two, I was in fear that if I went public, that it would harm the situation and would further stand in the way of me and my children being reunited. I had also read testimonies of women and children being punished within the Dutch system for going to the public. My children are U.S. citizens, even though they've been forced to become Dutch residents against our will, in efforts for them to have the rights to do what they've done, which they didn't really have initially in the first place, without fabricating testimony and making accusations that they had no one forced them to provide evidence for. So one of the reasons I didn't go more public first was because I feared threats and intimidation for taking this story public. The other reason that I didn't get more public early on was because I also, based on the culture that I come from in America, honestly believed that the social workers in this situation were going to assist me in being reunited with my children, and to facilitate the process of our reunification at a later date. So I didn't want to go forward publicly, and especially in a traumatized state, and bring attention to a situation that I thought could be resolved without having to go through these channels. Sadly, in the last year and a half, I've been forced to realize that the industries or organizations that are holding my children, particularly the Salvation Army in Holland, called Leger de Hels, which if you are affiliated with the Salvation Army at all, you should probably investigate their practices, because the way that they are operating, if it does go international, could stand to destroy the reputation of Salvation Army around the world. So if you are headquarters in Washington, D.C. or something like that for Salvation Army, you should at least investigate some of the people participating in your organization, in the guardianships of children. Also the fact that you housing these children, receiving large portions of funding, where your guardians and social workers are actually fabricating lies against parents in this particular country, you should be demanding evidence and proper due process for the children you are housing. You should not just be housing any child that they bring to you. You should be demanding, like, why are we housing these children? What are the parental issues? And also, why aren't you working with the parents more constructively in reunification? Or is that not the interest of the Dutch Leger de Hels at all? I've found out that they are receiving up to 100,000 euro per child per year. And when I tell you a little bit more about my experience, it does begin to look a little bit like child exploitation. And it does seem that there is a serious lack of justice and dominantly upon migrants, foreigners, and in my case, even visiting foreigners, which are often vulnerable in that system. They don't speak Dutch, they can't read Dutch, They have no idea what's going on. They don't even know the accusations being launched against them in order to defend themselves against them. They often, it seems like the embassies of these foreign nations, like right now, currently, there is a case with a Latvian family that I've seen EU Human Rights videos commission about, where the EU even has their hands sort of tied in assisting. In these other videos, it actually shows very clearly that even the appellate courts within the Dutch system had ordered the release of the children, and the organizations holding the children refused to release them, forcing these parents then to go to the EU, which then says we can't do anything, that's Dutch law. I am not a Dutch citizen. I was briefly staying in Holland with a friend of mine due to difficulties, financial problems within my divorce process. And I was also in a foreign continent through that whole process. So I was in a vulnerable situation, but I was in very good hands. And within a very short period of time, I had made a plan where I had gotten a very good job offer that was going to restore stability for my whole family and give me a stable income. And due to my daughter mentioning that at school, my children were removed. So not only was I utterly traumatized in that situation, but I was also denied my rights to a job elsewhere than the country that I didn't live in, which would have provided stability and income, which would have resolved the financial situation that I was in due to the difficulties in my divorce. So on top of that, my husband has been known, my ex-husband has been known to file false complaints and launch and even infiltrate people within my environment to, even from afar, because I had disengaged from him completely, and use them to launch complaints against me in several different places that I had tried to evade these behaviors. So we were not in any danger. We were staying in a very nice home with a government social worker. My children had their own room. There was some stress and some emotional duress. Plus I'm premenopausal, so my hormones could get a little bit emotional as well, which seems to be like something that's very shocking to this culture. Like they don't understand why someone would have emotions in a situation like this, which was very shocking to me. It's like, how can you not expect me to be angry about this? Any American mother would not have seen my reactions to be anything other than justified and normal, because of course I was in shock, you know. If you've read the bio on the GoFundMe, you can understand a little bit. Basically, my daughter went to school. She said we were moving to India, which wasn't even solidified. I was just telling her, oh, I got a job offer in India. What do you guys think about living in India? Because I always ask my children what they think about any sort of life changes that we're going to be making. And pardon me. It's taken me 1.5 years to tell this story publicly, so pardon me, but I need to smoke a little bit just because it helps to calm my nerves a little bit. So anyway, so yes, my daughter went to school, said we were moving to India. Immediately, the social worker from the school wanted to come to my home. So we invited her into Muriel's home where I was staying. And she was hysterical. She was like, oh my God, you know, India, it's a horrible place. My friend went there with her children and she had such a bad time, and you can't do that. It's dangerous. So essentially, this was one woman's personal feelings about a direction I was going, not knowing that it was like a corporate job that I was going to take that was providing like ultimate levels of stability, far better than any situation that I had had in Germany or Holland up to that point. So it was quite shocking, you know. And she said, well, you know, I'm willing to help you. I'll give you 6 months voluntary foster care. You'll have to schedule appointments to see your children. And I was like, this sounds ludicrous. I mean, why do I need to give my children to you because I'm moving to somewhere else from a country I don't even live? So it was really shocking, which is the first fundamental human rights violation, which is the right to movement. So that was quite intense. And I didn't really think anything of it. I was like, I haven't done anything wrong. The children are fine. You know, I don't need to worry. Like, you know, I wrote her a letter. I said, no way am I going to give my children to you for no reason, just because I want to move to another country. So I thought it was ludicrous. The next afternoon, the following day, I receive a phone call before I go to pick my children up from school, asking me to meet them at the police station in Zahnstadt. And I'm like, I have to pick my children up from school. No, you don't. Your children have been removed. And so I was hysterical. I didn't even know where this place was. I rode a bike. It was like, I don't know how many kilometers away, because I was so frantic and didn't know how to get there and like what the story was. It was really incredible. So I get there and I'm sitting there and I'm alone. You know, I don't have any support there because I don't know what's going on. And they bring in an interpreter and they refuse to speak to me in English. And I just start saying, I want the U.S. Embassy. Please bring the U.S. Embassy. I demand my embassy now. And I just kept saying this over and over again because I felt like I needed a witness or I needed some protection for myself or some support in understanding how this foreign country was basically violating my rights as, you know, a foreign visitor in their country, following their laws. You know, I was going to be staying for a little while. My children had to be in school. I put my children in the school. So it was a little bit shocking. And so I reached for my phone at this point, and then the woman said, she's recording. And then suddenly they press the alarm on the wall and like 10 shaved head, blue-eyed, I still see Nazis. It's very frightening because the trauma was so real. Like 6 to 10 officers come in and escort me, throw me out of the police station and say, this is not Den Haag. So how is this police station within Holland in Zahnstadt not, you know, part of the Dutch government? Because that's what they're saying. This is not Den Haag. I don't have rights there, apparently, because this is not the Dutch government. So what exactly is it? That whole experience was like very traumatizing for me. After that, I literally started, if someone triggered me, I would see Nazis. I would see bald head people everywhere. And ironically, they were really there. I just didn't notice them until someone triggered me with this kind of abusive behavior. So it was very, I'm still sort of adapting to the traumas that I've endured in this situation, the intimidation and threats, and the lack of access to my basic fundamental rights and human rights. So it was a very intense situation. So at this point, I'm thrown out of the police station. I have to borrow a phone from a guy. He's driving his baby in the stroller outside, who lends me his phone and lets me call my embassy. They agree to look into it right away, but they cannot get involved in family matters and so on and so forth. So basically the only role my embassy has been allowed to play in this entire situation within the Dutch system is they're allowed to monitor and investigate my children on an annual, biannual basis to make sure they're being cared for, which is one of the reasons I can feel more comfortable going public with this now, because I know at least if they do try to punish me or my children for going public with this story, that any sort of damage would be likely monitored by the U.S. Embassy, and hopefully they would be able to protect my children. The irony is they claim that I moved too much due to my divorce. I had moved 3 times in 3 years due to different aspects of financial difficulties, like I had lost my home because of some problems within the court case and the rejection of my ex to comply with the court order for support. So due to that, I lost my nice home, which was in Germany, and I had to move to a place where I could afford to sustain. In the process, my ex infiltrated people in my environment to keep attacking me, so I had to move again in order to escape that. In the time that they've had my children, my daughter has been moved 6 times. And ironically, she's moved to a similar house whenever they're going to be under investigation, which is the only place where they've given her art supplies and let her play her musical instruments and things like that. So she's very happy there, but they seem to move her back and forth from that home as needed for whatever investigations are taking place into their actions. My son has been moved 4 times in the last year. Which is probably, it's much more than I've ever moved them, even in 5 to 7 years. So much more than that even. So it's a bit incredible. You know, I did move to Europe because of my marriage, etc. These kinds of things, which are not unreasonable. And I did struggle due to this divorce because I was in a foreign land. I had been isolated in my marriage and had made few connections and really almost didn't get out of the house very much. So yeah, it was very interesting times. When I went to my friend in Holland, I've known her for 13 years. She was a single mother. She was very established. So I went to her for support. Maybe I would stay in Holland. Maybe I would find a job opportunity that would take me somewhere else. In the process of being in Holland, I knew that I would not want to immigrate there, just due to the different things that took place that even before that, that showed me that this was not a culture that I would be able to live in or adapt to. And maybe that was part of why they took my children, because they knew I had no intention of actually immigrating to their country, and I did make that very clear. So maybe it was a punishment for not loving Holland or something, I don't know. But I do know that they prey predominantly on vulnerable migrant families that have little resources or support in efforts to bring justice to these situations. And you can see in these EU human rights courts videos that I have listed on the GoFundMe fundraiser that they are not employing justifiable reasoning. They are not even providing evidence. They are not even being forced to establish a case against the parents. They are taking the word of the Salvation Army. Often the other social workers from the Kinderbeschämung, they're not even involved. They don't know the families, they don't know the parents, but their decision takes the children, and then the guardians of the Salvation Army, their word is accepted as truth without any validation to back it up. At the point that they took my children, the issues that concerned them, besides my right to movement, was my son had cavities in his baby teeth, although my daughter's teeth were fine, because we do have a thing in my family where my teeth have also deteriorated, my mother's, my grandmother's, so it is possible that we have some sort of hereditary thing going on. The Guardian for Salvation Army said that her dentist said there's no such thing as that, but there's a lot of evidence on the internet that proves that there are hereditary dental problems that do cause deterioration. But anyway, they were his baby teeth. He was 7 years old. They were about to fall out. It's absolutely normal. Children would have maybe some cavities in that situation. Also, due to my divorce, my ex had cut off the insurance, and we had had basic insurance in the country where we were living with him that sadly did not cover dental care. I had inquired and things like that, but I was unable to meet those demands due to the difficulties in my marriage. You would think in a situation like this that people would maybe want to assist a family, not rip them apart. Especially when I mentioned to them that when I had left my husband, he had completely abandoned the children, and that my son, who was put into a group home for behavioral issues, I told them my son has been battling with abandonment issues, and that this is going to be very detrimental to him because he's already dealing with these other dynamics that I had helped him very much to work through in that process as well. So obviously he was like probably the most traumatized out of all of us, which is really, really sad because he really needed his mommy. He was freaking out that they wouldn't let him have a nightlight in his room in the foster home. He was not doing well in that first month, so much so that in the first month in their care, he was hospitalized. And most people, even those who know that he suffered from an anxiety-related asthma, which began after this whole issue with my ex. And in this process, his emotions are so intense that he begins coughing, and it's almost like he's having an asthma attack, but it's actually more from anxiety. I was told that he was being hospitalized for, obviously, for breathing issues in regards to this. The U.S. Embassy apparently was told something completely different. The U.S. Embassy was told that he was malnourished. Now, this is taking place a month after he is in the care of Salvation Army and the foster parent, which he was utterly traumatized because the foster parent made him sleep alone. He generally did share a room or have, so not only was he in a horrible situation where he had also had abandonment issues already and was ripped from his mother and his sister, he was forced to sleep alone in a very strange place. He was not allowed to have a nightlight, and he was not eating properly because they force-fed him things he didn't like to eat, especially dairy products. And he had allergies, which I'm told now by them he has no allergies, yet a doctor in France has told me otherwise, that he has all these different allergies, including dairy. So if they're force-feeding him foods he's allergic to, and he's also traumatized and frightened and terrified, maybe those issues were actually the care, of the lack of care and compassion that he was being given in this process of being ripped from his mother. Many behaviors that were taking place because of the trauma were then blamed and projected onto me. I have requested evidence repeatedly to no avail. I don't know if my lawyers have demanded evidence. I know the court for a fact did not demand evidence, because in the hearing where they took my child for another year, they had no evidence. They had a list of speculation, and even my lawyer said to them, you investigate to take children, you don't take children to investigate. They never investigated me. Okay. No evidence, no investigation, no proper due process, no demand to provide evidence for false accusations. Many I know for a fact are false. No demand for them to provide evidence. They take my children for 1 year. At this point, I am quite broken and I don't know what to do. I can't even stay in my friend Muriel's house anymore because it's too emotional for me because my children are not there. And it was very challenging, and I have to file an appeal now for that case. But based, I'm thinking, okay, maybe I will just try to work with them, and that will be the easiest way, and then I don't have to deal with legal cases or whatever, and I can try to build a relationship, and then they can help us be reunited. Which you would think, considering these are social agencies that are supposed to be assisting children and families, that keeping families together or reuniting families would be one of their top priorities. So I decided I was going to go with that, and I chose not to file an appeal because my emotional situation and my financial situation at that time were not the best. So I felt that the most constructive thing I could possibly do is try to work with these organizations to be reunited with my family. That also turned out to be a great disappointment, which was very, very more terrifying and more traumatizing. And in that process, I also took quite a bit of threats and intimidation from the Guardian of Salvation Army. And I have screenshots that show clear psychological abuse in regards to visitation with my children. The list goes on, but I'm trying to stay focused. So at this point, they've taken my children for a year. It's impossible for me to stay with my friend Muriel. Also, I'm having issues like really knowing, how did this happen? How are they getting away with this? Are people involved in this? So you're really isolated and confused and utterly traumatized. So the first thing I do is I go to the Organization for Abused Women in Holland, in efforts to try to get maybe some emotional support, some psychological support for the traumatic impact that this has had on myself and my children. I had supported therapy from the point that they were in school all through that process. And I had hoped that they would also be getting therapy for the trauma, which has not actually taken place. I don't even know if it has yet at all. Although it was used as an excuse in the false accusations, because within the school I had said very much that I would like my children to get therapy, particularly my son for the abandonment issues. And they actually put forth in the court where they took my children for a year that I denied them therapy, which was not true. And even Muriel, my friend that I was staying with, can even vouch for that. So it was very intense. The accusations made against me were horrific, and there was no evidence demanded for that, which is more frightening when you're in a situation that involves the sanctity of your family, and no due process is required for them to destroy families and to traumatize children and mothers and fathers and parents. So it was quite a very intense situation. I then went into Amsterdam at that point and began volunteering in a vegan restaurant and managed to find a room that I could stay in while I continued to try to see my children and continued to seek assistance for the situation. So in the Organization for Abused Women, they told me very clearly that the Salvation Army is capable of providing me an address for residency, but they couldn't do anything. I'm not sure why they weren't able to help me or what the story was. And they sent me to another organization. In the meantime, also, I'm like talking to an immigration lawyer about how I can actually stay in Holland and be close to my children. And they're basically telling me that, you have to have 2,000 euros a month for that to even happen. So I go to this other social agency and I'm seeking emotional support. Like, I really need therapy. I'm like, it was really, I mean, if you're a mother, you can imagine. If you're not a mother, maybe you can't, because most of the women facilitating these processes of ripping families apart don't have children and often can't even comprehend what it takes to raise them, and the dedication and love and the emotional bond and connection that ties families together. They don't seem to have any value or respect for that in that particular social system, which was even more frightening. It's like they just like basically take your children and throw you to the streets of a foreign country, one that you're visiting, so you don't even really have like the resources or ability to maintain yourself for a long term while you're trying to stay close to your children. So the next social agency I go to in efforts to find therapy tells me that I have no rights to any form of assistance in Holland, that I don't even have the right to stay there, because I'm a US citizen, and I'm only allowed to be there for a minimum of 3 months, and I can go somewhere else and then come back. But as far as the right to work or the right to residency, so I went to the Guardian of the Salvation Army, and I requested what the woman from the abuse organization had said to me, which was that they could give me an address so that I could register, so that I could work towards getting the right to work and live in Holland. I had asked the Guardian of Salvation Army that on several different occasions, to no avail. So eventually, like, there was nothing I could do. And so my only choice was to actually leave my children in Holland. But there's actually a lot in that situation. Being intimidated by the Guardian for showing emotion to my children. And this was like the first visit after they ripped my children from me. And I'm like emotional, and I'm like, you know, normal. And I was literally intimidated and threatened due to showing emotion in front of my children. I've been continually intimidated and threatened in regards to discussing the situation, because they continually are trying to make my children believe that they need to give up and that they're not coming home. And even though I'm still in court, so if I mention the fact that I am still working on this process to get them released so that we can all be back together, because they all want to be with me, then I get in trouble for mentioning that process. Like, I'm supposed to let my children give up on ever being reunited with me, even though I'm still in court processes and still contacting organizations and still getting the State Department involved. And this is like before, you know, they reject my lawyer from the court and refuse me the right to legal representation, and then unjustly, and I have a telephone recording of this, make me believe they've taken my parental rights and my children will grow in Holland without any legal processes, which you know, that's further on in the story, of course. So, you know, that's like the initial part of it. I tried to work with them. I was under severe emotional duress most of the time I was in Holland, and eventually I had to make a plan to actually leave Holland, because there was no way for me to sustain or survive or meet the requirements of establishing stability for my children there in order to get my children back. So they basically made it impossible for me to meet their demands, made it impossible for me to stay close to my children. So that's like blatant parental alienation. And they also did not do the things that they're actually required to do to assist me in that process. So I was basically, you know, and maybe at that point they thought that I was just like this like vulnerable, you know, mother, and it didn't matter. I would give up and go away, and then they would have my children and continue to earn 100,000 per child per year, 100,000 euro per child per year. The irony is that these things always take place at the end of the year. almost like there's like some, I would love to see like a detective or someone investigate how many children they take before the end of the year, which probably allows them to get their funding for the next year. How many children actually go home on and after, and how many children are kept? Because the moment they take your children, and then they have the first court where they don't demand anything, so you have to appeal that. So the moment they take your children, they have about 4 to 5 months, maybe 6 months before you can even do anything to really get them back. So it's really a very unjust system. So at this point, then I decide to go to Israel, where I have support, potential for survival, and all of these things. Within 3 months, I spent 3 months volunteering. I was volunteering the entire time I was there, but I was living very well, doing exchange, working for my housing, working for food. And I did have a stable home. I had a lease. I had everything. I had a good budget for food every week. And I was sustaining. I was studying Judaism, which I've actually been ridiculed in court twice for my religious beliefs since this began. And they've actually turned my daughter against it. Like when I was first telling her about, I sent them some books and different things, and they were very excited and very interested in it. And within a week, my daughter had completely changed her perception. And I'm pretty sure that there was some influence there, which, you know, we have heard Salvation Army is not exactly, as I've read somewhere that they actually ridicule and persecute Jews right on their website. So that was another disconcerting aspect of the situation. And my religion and my religious beliefs have been brought up in the court under ridicule twice since then. So there is also another violation of human rights, which is my religious belief, which whether it was Taoism or Judaism, I still have rights within both of those religions. So I don't understand, because they even tried to, the guardian for the Salvation Army even tried to attack me because I had once been a Buddhist. But I've always been a universalist, and I teach many things around the world in regards to different belief systems. So I really feel that my daughter has undergone some serious psychological things due to how they've attempted to manipulate her and her feelings and her beliefs in this process. I've also noticed that when they're being investigated or whatever, like somebody always buys them a lot of, they give them money to go buy stuff. And children, if they have things they like, then suddenly I went shopping, I got this Lego thing I've always wanted, I love it here, you know, like this kind of thing. Right now I'm being reprimanded because I'm refusing, I don't want my children to give up. They're literally saying, like, this is the house you're going to be in until you're 18. First of all, I think somewhere along the line, my daughter has the right to make her own decision about where she wants to be, first of all. Secondly, I think that, you know, if I'm still in the court processes and these things are still up in the open, they should not be trying to force my children to give up. The last time that they did that, my children became hysterical. I became hysterical. We were all emotional and we were crying for each other. And I was actually forced to give up my stability that I had created for them in Israel in efforts to come back to them and be close to them, which I realize now I must do for their sanity as well as my own, because after a certain amount of time, it really seems to only get harder to be away from them, especially if you can't see them at all for 3 to 6 months. It gets very hard. So I'm currently here in Europe trying to be available to them while also being in the court, because not being in the court, thinking my legal representation could represent me, and then having them walk all over my legal rights clearly was not conducive. So at this point, in reality, the Dutch system is completely complicit in my lack of stability. Okay, because first, when they took my children, they denied me the right to a lucrative and stable job in a foreign country. Okay, so what country it was shouldn't matter. They brought it up in the court. Are you still going to Israel? I was like, or to India? And I was like, I don't even have the ability to get to India yet. I have a job offer and I'm organizing that. And it wasn't even a solid plan. It was something that I had mentioned to my children. But in that regard, they have denied me a stable job. Then they have denied me the stability in the country where I created the stability in order to get my children returned. They denied me my legal representation to establish that stability in efforts to get the children released. So, and now I am in Europe where I am not allowed to work and where I have to figure out how to sustain in efforts to stay close to them. So on the other side of all of this, it's really starting to look like this whole situation is the cause of much of this instability. And it's true. Because being without my children, I've been a mother for 20 years. Okay. I've had a family and beautiful things, you know, to celebrate and all of these beautiful things. And now I'm sitting alone at Christmas crying for my children. You know, on Hanukkah, I'm lighting the candles and they're informing me that they are taking my children for good without any proper due process. So if you can imagine the mental, emotional, psychological toll this is having on me as a person who believes that there is justice in the world. Do you know what's even harder? What's even harder is that when you're trying to tell this story to people and they don't believe it. How many parents are getting walked all over just because people believe that there is actually justice in these systems, when in some of these systems, whether it's state by state or country by country, there's no justice at all. Norway and Holland lead in the human rights abuses of this nature. And what it seems to be boiling down to is that there is no definition for what the best interest of the child is. So whatever individual is put in charge has the right to decide what the best interest of the child is. So basically the fact that my children would stay up in their bedroom after being put to bed at 8 o'clock, they would stay and play until 9 or 10. And I would be telling them the whole time, go to bed, you have to go to school, go to bed. The friend I was staying with can even vouch for this. So basically because of that, and my children going to school and falling asleep in class, I don't have the right to be a parent anymore. And do you know how incredible and disgusting that is? That is, I'm sorry, that's fascism. Do you imagine, like, a child falls asleep in class and the government or the system or these organizations have the right to come and take that child from their families? This is insane. This is unbelievable. So I understand those of you who don't believe that this is really happening, but I'm begging you to believe that this is really happening. And I'm begging you to be more supportive of families and parents in this situation, because I may have gotten a lot more accomplished and may have been a lot stronger in this process. In Israel, they believed me. They understood. They saw my heart and my sincerity, and they knew. And they've also been through a little bit around Europe, so they are not utterly oblivious to the kinds of things that some of these governments have employed against people in the past and present. So that gave me my strength back. That gave me my love of self back. That gave me the ability to, like, believe that maybe I can do something about this. That gave me the strength to come back to Europe. I spent a month terrified and immobilized of even returning to this continent because of what took place and how unreasonable and unjustified it was. And I just felt like if I go there, these people are going to abuse me and traumatize me and violate my rights. And, you know, and it's really sad because I do a lot of work where I'm like promoting international tourism and promoting events around the world and doing my work in events around the world. So I do have a certain outlet regarding tourism, and it's pretty sad when I'm terrified to return to this continent and to these specific countries. So I've left many things out, and I'm sure I will fill them in as time progresses. So at this point, I've gone to Israel, I've come back. So while I'm in Israel, I have legal representation. This person has a background in human rights, and she's able to look at many different dynamics, which a lot of the family courts do not look at. First of all, there's a court hearing, and I'm asking the guardian of the Salvation Army, like, when is this court hearing? Can you please send information to my lawyer? Like, what is going on? Why am I not being properly informed of these things? So she only gets the information 2 days before the court hearing, my lawyer, after I'm asking for a month. And these screenshots can be subpoenaed or what have you, or provided. And so my lawyer has 2 days to go to the court. I'm thinking that this is the court for the release of the children, but apparently it's something completely different, and we're not even notified of what the hearing is about. So I am not even notified that they are having a hearing regarding the partial removal of my parental rights. Nor do I even know if I'm allowed to have legal representation there. Apparently I was, but I was not informed in any way whatsoever of this hearing. And I started asking the guardian. There was some hearing coming up. I wasn't informed what it was about. My lawyer did not get any official information until 2 days before the hearing. She did manage to prepare and to get there. At that point, she was able to establish my stability. She was able to establish many things, including the fact that they were not legally allowed to take my children for more than 6 months, and that my children should have been released when I left the country, which were things I didn't know about. I don't know Dutch. I don't even know how to deal with the lawyers. I've never had lawyers in my life until I left my ex-husband. So I don't know these systems, which is probably another reason of preying on the vulnerability of people. So in this regard, she establishes that, and we're feeling pretty strong. This wasn't for their release, but we have some good, solid arguments, and she requested that they do an investigation. Whether or not they actually did an investigation requiring evidence for the reasons they took the children in the first place is still to be requested or what have you. I don't know that actually happened. What I do know is that I think a month and a half later was the court for the release of the children, and this attorney then goes to that court and they reject her entry into the court. They do not allow my lawyer into the court to represent me. My current lawyer witnessed that, and my other lawyer then worked to get her to represent me. Now I just hope that, you know, because I don't know, I don't know these people. I don't know these systems. I'm at the mercy of the people involved in hopefully bringing justice. But so far there has been little to no justice. Not even evidence, investigation, basic due process, which is terrifying to a loving mother who is struggling because her family is ripped apart. And my children are struggling because they want to be with their family. And in this culture, apparently the family doesn't mean very much, or migrant family doesn't mean very much. I don't know. So now that they have rejected my lawyer in the courts, they have now walked all over my rights again and taken my children for another year without allowing me legal representation. And now it's already the end, almost the end of the year, almost Hanukkah. And I receive a phone call from the Kinderbescheinigung for the first time ever since they took my children. And they phoned me to inform me that I have lost my parental rights and that my children are going to grow and remain in Holland. My attorney that had just been rejected in the court had recommended that I record this call due to the way things are going. And so I did. For 30 minutes, this woman tells me that I've lost my parental rights, that they've decided to take away my parental rights, that my children will remain and grow in Holland, that there's nothing I can do about it. And I keep saying, but what about my lawyer? And what about this? And what about that? And what about a hearing? And isn't there going to be some kind of legal process around this? And they attempt to let me believe that that's not required. And about 25 to 30 minutes into this recorded phone call, I state that I'm recording. Then suddenly they want the information of my lawyer. I have 24 hours to get that information to them. Actually, she didn't even give me 24 hours. I had to request 24 hours. She gave me like 4 hours to get this information to her, or they were moving forward without, and making me believe without my right to a lawyer. So it was like, and it's the holidays and I'm without my family, and now I'm being forced again, re-traumatized again with completely losing my family now. And as you can imagine, this was a very painful situation and a very difficult situation. And at that point, actually, I was unable to maintain my work exchange because I was in too much of an emotional and traumatized state around the potential to lose my children completely, that I was not able to deal with the day-to-day necessities. So that was, and my children started crying for me at this point because they're afraid they're losing me for years now too. And it was one of the worst, almost worse than the last year's holiday. I forgot to tell you, when they initially took my children, that my son, I don't support Santa Claus, or Sinterklaas as they call it in Holland. So one of the first threats and intimidations came through the fact that I don't lie to my children about Santa Claus. And so it was sort of part of their trying to separate me from my children. They take my children to meet Santa Claus. And my daughter comes and she says, Mommy, why do you lie? There is a Santa Claus. I just met him, Sinterklaas, by the way. And I said, honey, if there's anything I ever told you, I promised you that I would not lie to you. So at some point, you'll know what the truth is. And my son heard this. And so I guess my son knew that I was not lying, knew that I would not lie to him, and proceeded, I guess, in the coming week or so to tell the woman, you know, to get her to tell the truth that Sinterklaas was not real. So apparently he pushed her to the point that she admitted that Sinterklaas was not real. And the next phone call 2 weeks later, Mommy, you were right. Santa Claus is not real. Zen got her to tell the truth, but Zen got sent away. He's now in a group home. He was sent to a behavioral center. Okay. And they're blaming all of this on him, and they're not taking any account into the trauma that he is suffering. And he's the younger of the two children, you know. So that was like one of those other violations of your beliefs that took place. There are so many little things like that happen throughout this whole situation that it's hard to pull them all up at one time, but I'm sure that I will be informing you as time progresses, especially as this continues on. And I find a lot of stuff comes out when I'm re-traumatized, when more injustice is taking place against my family within these systems. Right now, there is a court ruling in Amsterdam that has just been pushed out for 12 more days. And I'm praying that that is an example that they're actually looking more deeply into this situation. And maybe there is hope. My lawyer told me there is about a 5% chance that my children would be released by this court. And then I still have several other appeals I have to make, like the illegal removal of my parental rights and different things like that. And who knows what else is going to come up in the process, while also trying to maintain and survive in cultures that I can't legally reside for more than a short period of time and have no rights to work. So it's pretty intense situation. But I'm a very strong person and I have good people around, and we've begun the fundraiser now at GoFundMe for Free Zin and Zion. You can go to facebook.com/Free Zin and Zion, twitter.com/Free Zin and Zion, freezinandzion.wordpress.com, and GoFundMe Free Zin and Zion. All of these things are there. If you go to any of those pages, you'll find links to all of those things on Twitter and Facebook, as well as many documentaries and videos of EU court hearings. And this is what I'm fearing, what I'm afraid of now, is the fact that this other family in Holland that's been enduring this, also for unjust reasoning and without evidence and investigation, they've actually managed to get further along. They've actually gone to the EU. They said the court ordered them to be released and they ignored them, or the court ordered them to be released and they came home and the next day they took them again. So do I even know that once they're released that they're actually going to be released? I mean, I feel like in some ways maybe I have a benefit that I am a foreigner, and that maybe there are organizations that will help foreigners in this situation. I am getting the State Department in the United States involved. The embassy, obviously, their hands are tied, which is another thing that baffles people, including myself. We believe that we go into these cultures and that our governments can protect us. But in this situation, you know, you watch on the Hollywood film, demand your embassy. Well, I demanded my embassy and they weren't coming, you know. So, you know, we need to start being more realistic about how these cultures are violating rights. And not only, I mean, largely these are migrant populations that they're preying on. So they're preying on people that automatically don't know their rights. And then they're walking all over their rights unless you can show them that somebody's going to stand up for your rights. And then finding that lawyer or person who's actually capable of doing that is not an easy process either, nor is it inexpensive. Even with legal aid, it's not free. So if you don't have the financial ability to fight and the ability to pay for a good lawyer, then forget it. There are children and families being ripped apart simply because of those dynamics, and it's really sad. And I never wanted to believe this either. I was the woman that was always like, you know, she must have done something wrong if they took her kids, you know, because they can't just do that. And that's what I hear all the time. They can't just do that. They can just do that. They can. And they have. And in some countries, they do. And in some countries, they do it often. So as parents, we need to like become aware of that. And on top of it, there are parental rights organizations that have uncovered how they're getting away with it. Something did change. We did have parental rights that gave us these fundamental rights of raising our children. But thanks to a policy put forth by the UN that has been adapted largely in the EU and by a few states in America and other places like that, we don't have parental rights anymore. And we were not informed either. And that's something, there's a documentary on the pages called Overruled. And if you watch that, it's taking place in America, but that it will explain to you how our parental rights have been eroded, and what we as parents, whether we're enduring this situation or not, we as parents need to unite in establishing and making sure that our parental rights are protected, because this is insane. I mean, I just don't understand how ripping families apart and traumatizing children and families can be accepted as an industry, you know. And it's sad because we've seen this before. It's not unrealistic to believe that certain people within these industries and within these organizations are not working together to exploit. We had the thing in America with the Cash for Kids situation. There's been a lot of information out there regarding exploitation by these organizations and these industries. So it might be time that we wake up about this before it's like becoming something that is going to impact us all. Because I know that no one here wants to lose their children because their child fell asleep in class. I mean, come on, what is that? This is incredible. And it took me a long time, 1.5 years of being hopeful and optimistic and doing everything that was demanded of me to come forth and start to share this story. There's still so much more that I need to share, so many other things that took place in this process. But that's the foundation of what has taken place so far, where we're at now. And if you can, please support and like our pages, and even more so if you can donate, please help, because it's really assisting me in trying to get ahead of this situation and trying to bring justice to this situation, not only for myself, but for parents everywhere. And thank you for taking the time. I know not everybody can read English and things like that, so some of my foreign friends and people around the world, this gives you an opportunity to know a little bit more about what's been going on. And I'm actually amazed how many people didn't even know, even though I'd been sharing little bits here and there about what I've been enduring. So I'm grateful that you took the time to listen and understand and do support in any way possible, like the pages, because my next goal is going to be to get the international media involved and to start approaching English-speaking organizations around the world, including parental rights organizations, parental alienation organizations, because they do seem to have a desire to separate and alienate the families, maybe with hopes that families will give up. Thank you so much, and please help. I'm sorry. Please help if you can, because yeah, it's been a very challenging phase of my existence, and I am coming through it, and I'm getting stronger, and part of how I'm getting stronger in this process is thanks to all of you. Thanks.